Well, hello, good evening, and welcome to episode 34 of Fracking Nightmare. And although I've been away from the studio for a few weeks, which has really coincided with UK Column taking a couple of weeks break from their 50-week schedule. But last week, of course, I put out the very first live broadcast from Fracking Nightmare via Bambuser. So for the regular YouTube viewers of this program, if you want to catch up on last week's program, it is on Bambuser rather than YouTube. So if you simply search for Fracking Nightmare episode 33 or Fracking Nightmare Bambuser, you will find it. And we had a good crowd up there. Local people joined the campers. And we're also joined by the Parliamentary Labour Party candidate, Margaret Pinder from Beverley, who shared her views on fracking. And hopefully her views will be taken account of by Ed Miliband. And I still think that if you're watching, somehow I doubt, but if you change your stance on hydraulic fracturing, I think you might increase your chances of actually getting into number 10 next year quite significantly. Meanwhile, it's been a very busy few weeks. There's a lot been happening, and not least a lot today, more of which later. But for those of you who did see last week's show, you will know, of course, that the tower that was built at the entrance to the Crawberry Hill site, just a few miles to the west of Beverley in East Yorkshire, had been destroyed by the High Court enforcement officers. Well, let's just reflect on what had occurred there, and let's look a little bit at the history of Crawberry Hill. We've got a picture here on the screen, and this is the merry band of people that basically set up the camp there. It's a mixture of some old hands. There's certainly a Borkum, at least one Borkum and Barton Moss veteran there. There's a number of Barton Moss veterans, actually, but at least one person who was at both camps. And then a number of local people setting up the camp there in the latter part of May. Well, then there wasn't much happening at Crawberry Hill, but whenever the tankers came in to empty the ditches and the tank, yes, that's the tank that leaks, then the police made it very clear that they were not going to facilitate any peaceful protest. So that resulted in this tower being built that became known as Crawberry Castle. And this is a picture taken just a few days before the eviction. There's yours truly on the top there. I have to say it was an absolutely outstanding view of the beautiful Wolds. I mean, from that vantage point, you really do get to see the wonderful agricultural countryside of East Yorkshire. Arguably one of the more remote, not so much in terms of mileage, but in terms of the fact that people just don't go there. They're one of the more remote areas of the country. This is a photograph that was taken literally just a couple of nights before the eviction. And then on the night before the eviction, I actually had the misfortune to be clipped by the wing mirror of a passing vehicle while we were speaking with the security guards. And fortunately, it was just some light bruising of the kidneys, nothing too serious. Well, it did seem to trigger some similar events over the next few days, but perhaps more of that a bit later. But the eviction came at 9:30 or so on the morning of Saturday, August 2nd. And I was live streaming the event, and although I took a little bit of video footage, one of the locals has actually put together an outstanding video collage of that event. So I'd like to introduce Dave Morris from the Yorkshire Frack Free Group, and I'd like to share with you Dave's video of that day, the Crawberry Hill eviction. So take a look at this, and then we'll run straight into the first break, and I'll see you at the beginning of part 2.
A structure that had been built by anti-fracking protesters, or as they prefer to be known, protectors, at the entrance of Rathlin Energy drilling site near Walkington in East Yorkshire. This blocked off access to the site for 3 months. A court order was granted in the High Courts in London, giving Rathlin Energy the rights back to the drilling site. Today, the High Court bailiffs came to remove what had been named Crawberry Hill Castle. On the morning of the 2nd of August, I received a text alert saying that the bailiffs had arrived. I gathered my gear and headed off to the campsite. I found the road had been blocked off by the police, so I had to walk the final stretch carrying my 2 cameras and a heavy tripod. By the time I arrived, the siege of the castle was over. Bailiffs were standing along the entrance to the drilling pad, and where once stood a proud symbol of defiance, there was now just a pile of scrap wood. All people could do was look as the High Court bailiffs cleared away the debris to enable vehicles access to the well pad. Throughout the morning, more and more locals started to turn up, some having to walk over a mile across fields to get around the police roadblocks. An air of defiance started to fill the area, as it was decided to make a last stand by blocking the vehicles with a peaceful sit-down protest in front of the entrance. The police gave a number of warnings to the people, but these were ignored. The result of this was 6 arrests. Two protectors from the camp and 4 locals. The police had moved swiftly and efficiently, and in one swoop had cleared away the vehicles from the protectors. Some of the protectors seemed stunned and shocked at seeing the unnecessary, and in one case, quite violent arrest of their friends and family.
See you later, man. Bye-bye. Bye. Come on, Pop.
This soon evolved into fear and anger, with a few people wanting to express their frustrations, but this soon fizzled out.
What are you going to do about this assault? You'll take. You will charge 4 people for assaulting.
We shall not be enslaved.
You will charge them with assault, will you? You just witnessed the assault. You're witnessing the injury. Why aren't you doing anything about this? Are you going to arrest them for assault?
Oh!
Are you going to arrest them for assault?
Easy, right?
Pornography you've got there. What? Is that a step too far for you? This is it. I don't think it's very far from this bit. Who are you? Who are you? Who are you? Who are you? Who are you?
ever resourceful and creative, some of the people took to playing drums and other instruments, and soon a vibrant beat echoed through the campsite, which lifted spirits somewhat. One final act of defiance, the wily Silver Fox took the flag that had been flying on top of the castle and proudly marched it up the road through the campsite so all could bear witness that we had been dealt a blow but had not been beaten.
% of the English countryside is under threat from fracking, a process which has transformed the landscape in many parts of the United States and Australia, and contaminated the drinking water and air with highly toxic chemicals and gases.
1 in 3 hydraulic fracturing was using a carcinogen. So it really is a chemical cocktail that goes into the earth, of which up to 40% remains there.
The grandchildren were in the bath and they started screaming and everything that was in the water was burnt.
The MDs have been instructed not to report any negative health effects that they believe to be associated with living over a gas field.
There's nothing inherent about the shale gas process that is going to lead to problems.
Some of this material was actually taken to a large sewage treatment works, which had no capacity to handle radioactive materials of this kind.
800,000 gallons was dumped into the Manchester Ship Canal.
50 seismic events were recorded during just 6 fracking treatments.
What is the minimum depth that the fracking will fracture?
We can't tell you until we drill the exploration.
Have you no idea whatsoever? Because it doesn't look like you've done your research.
Shale gas part of the future, and we will make it happen.
We are just numbers, and we are sat on this rich vein of gas, and they will do and say anything to get that gas out of the ground.
So thanks very much to Dave Morris for that video. An outstanding piece of footage there, Dave. Thanks very much. Now, Dave drives over from York, some 30-odd miles on a very regular basis over to Crawberry Hill. He's one of the increasing number of local people from East Yorkshire who visit the Crawberry Hill site on a regular basis. So I'm pleased to say that the number of groups arising in East Yorkshire is increasing. I think there are something like about a dozen or so different groups right now, and they have a major task ahead of them, as we shall see in a few minutes. But before I get any further into part two, I would actually like to take this opportunity to thank all of those people who continue to support the fracking awareness campaign. Without your support, I could not do what I do. This is a full-time commitment and some. I am averaging about 900 miles a week. Obviously, coming down to Plymouth on an average of twice a month to do the Fracking Nightmare shows, plus getting out to other events, plus, of course, being on the front line at Crawberry Hill and doing as much work as I possibly can with the local community there. And as you're going to see as we go through this next part, we have a tremendous opportunity in East Yorkshire. But if you do want to support the Fracking Awareness Campaign, unfortunately the funds seem to disappear at a phenomenal rate of knots. Unfortunately, much of that in fuel. But please go to frackingnightmare.com. And there is some other information on that website. But one of the most important pieces of information on that website is the Excel spreadsheet. This is a free download. It's the life's work of Dr. Theo Colborne, who put this into the public domain. It's her analysis of the chemicals used in the US hydraulic fracturing industry. It's a list of some 960 odd chemicals. It's not only the list of chemicals. She goes into the detail of looking at the purpose of those chemicals within the fracking process, but also looking at the impact those chemicals have on the environment and also in terms of negative health. So go to frackingnightmare.com. That's where you can make a donation towards the Fracking Awareness Campaign and take the opportunity to download this spreadsheet, and then please share it far and wide, and particularly with local authorities who are potentially going to be fracking. Or, you know, we're looking at some 64% of the UK basically is now up for grabs. This is one hell of a lot of people in this country. In the US, it's estimated there are some 15 million people, which is not even 5% of the total population, who live within 1 mile of a fracked well. If the British government and the gas industry has its way, then the number of people living within 1 mile of a fracked gas well in this country will be significantly higher than that. So let's just take a brief return to Crawberry Hill. I do want to acknowledge the people that unfortunately were arrested on that day. The video footage will show that those arrests were unlawful. Now, for the first time since the camp was established at Crawberry Hill, Humberside Police did actually endeavour to create the impression that they were there to facilitate peaceful protest. So they went through their 5-step process of warning the protectors that they would be arrested. Well, the sergeant went through that particular process in about 20 minutes, and when he was reading the 5th warning, he didn't even finish the final sentence before he stopped and said, well, you're not going to get up anyway, and he just nodded, and his colleagues waded in, and then they clearly had identified 5 people who they wanted to arrest. Now, you know, what I know is that every one of those protesters was already going to get up immediately that 5th warning had been issued. You know, we were not there to have cheap arrests. If you're going to have an arrest, it's worth making it worthwhile, like when the trucks are coming in. So in this picture we have on screen here We have one of the protectors there. In fact, this is what you see there is one of the locals who are very supportive of the group. And in fact, that particular individual, Richard, has done an enormous amount of work over the last year or so in terms of going around to the local communities, raising awareness of what is about to appear on their doorstep. Now, this is Crawberry Hill. We're focused on Crawberry Hill because we have a very unique opportunity at Crawberry Hill. Just like at Borkum last year, where Cuadrilla had limited scope in terms of their planning. They had to vacate the site at Borkum by September 28th last year. And the protectors at Borkum, coupled with the 6 days of Reclaim the Power camp being in situ, which meant that the police told Cuadrilla they had to shut down their operation for 6 days. And that was absolutely catalytic in delaying Cuadrilla and preventing them from fulfilling the task in hand. Consequently, Cuadrilla had to vacate the site at Borkum and resubmit their planning application. Now, when due notice was served, they were submitting the application. The local community obviously became very active, and there were some 889 letters of objection submitted to West Sussex County Council and just 9 letters of support. Yet despite the overwhelming opposition, West Sussex County Council simply rubber-stamped Cuadrilla's planning application. Well, the local community decided that the West Sussex County Council had acted unlawfully, potentially, by ignoring the 889 letters of objection. So they sought permission to establish and launch a judicial review. That permission is now being granted, and that judicial review will take place at some future date. Meanwhile, of course, Cuadrilla cannot get back on that site. Then at the other side of the county, over near the Hampshire border, the company of Celtic submitted an application to start an exploratory well in Whisper Green. Once again, there was enormous opposition, and this time, perhaps with the threat of another judicial review hanging over them, West Sussex County Council did indeed take heed of all the letters of objection and rejected Celtic's application. So, what's the similarity between Sussex and East Yorkshire? Well, there's many similarities. They're both in the heart of Tory country. Well, here at Crawberry Hill, Rathlin Energy are also running out of time. The planning application that they have in place at Crawberry Hill expires in November, and in fact they have to start the process of returning the land to its natural state in mid-September and complete the job by November 5th. Well, of course, this is why they've actually focused their attention on the site a few miles to the east over at West Newton, more of which in a little while. But at Crawberry Hill, Rathlin have advised the public that they have been delayed at Crawberry Hill for 2 reasons. One is due to unexpected environmental permits that they have to apply for, and also the protectors. And of course, the castle was there for some 7 weeks before the High Court bailiffs came in to remove it. So now, Rathlin Energy have stated that they have indeed submitted the planning application. They put notice on that the application would be available for viewing at East Yorkshire Council's website from August the 6th. Unfortunately, that was delayed due to holidays and shortage of staff at East Yorkshire offices. So the submissions have to be into East Yorkshire Council by September the 11th. So this is potentially East Yorkshire's 9/11, dare I say. Meanwhile, at the camp, obviously, the awareness campaign continues, and this is the new castle. This is a structure that's been built on the verge, and of course, Judge Burse at the High Court hearing stated categorically that in awarding Rathlin and the local farmer possession of the land, or repossession of the land, that he was not in any way, shape or form trying to impede or impinge upon the protectors' right to peaceful protest, making the observation that the protectors could simply move to the verge. Of course, I think he was aware that we were probably already on the verge anyway. But this is the new lookout tower, where we have a good view of the approaching trucks. So, we'll come back to Crawberry Hill in a second. But also last week, at the beginning of the week, in fact on Monday last week, a very significant development in Northern Ireland, where the Northern Ireland Assembly Environment Minister announced that Tamron would not be able to drill the exploratory well that they wanted to drill in Belcoo, in the quarry in County Fermanagh, into the Loch Allen Basin, that they would have to seek permission by submitting a full environmental impact analysis. Now, Tamron, which is an Australian company, claim that they have permission to drill and they should not have to seek further permissions, and they certainly shouldn't have to submit an environmental impact analysis. So, would you believe that they've actually decided that it's going to be cheaper to take the Northern Irish Assembly to court and thrash it out with the judiciary rather than go and prepare a full environmental impact analysis? So what do they know here? Do they know that if they do fulfill that obligation now to prepare a full environmental impact analysis, then it's going to reduce the chances even further? Quite possibly. Well, the Northern Ireland Assembly were indeed under some pressure, because in Northern Ireland, this certainly around County Fermanagh, it's an agricultural community. Unlike East Yorkshire, where it's primarily agribusiness, in Northern Ireland it's still fundamentally private farming. And the people of County Fermanagh are very well aware that if this industry takes a foothold in the province, then it will change the province beyond recognition and potentially make it totally uninhabitable. So the people have let their views known. Some 700 people, in fact, were at the gates at the weekend protest, and then in fact the day before, I believe it was, that the decision was taken to deny Tamron the permission, there was a march which included some 140 agricultural vehicles. Well, we've got a short video that I want to show you from Belcoo, and this is the children of Belcoo letting the government know that they needed the government to make the right decision to protect their future. So take a look at this.
No, we won't back down. No, we won't back down. We will stand here at the gates of hell. We won't back down. For as long as it takes, we won't break. And we'll keep Tamboran from drilling this ground. We won't back down. And we won't be pushed around. Hey, Tamboran! No matter what she runs. Hey, Arlie! We will stand our ground. And we won't be pushed around. You may know what's right. Don't play with our children's lives. You may trample our rights into the ground. We won't back down. Hey, Tamboran! From now on she runs. Hey, Arlie! We will stand our ground. And we won't be pushed around. You may lie and deceive, but we just don't believe. that you won't poison the water we need with your endless greed. Hey, Tambourine, from now I want you out. Hey, darling, we'll stand our ground, and we won't be pushed around. So here on this land, we will make our stand. The politicians may have let us down, but we will stand our ground. Hey, Tambourine, from now I want you out. Hey, darling, we will stand our ground, and we won't be pushed around. From now I want you out. Hey, darling, we will stand our ground, and we won't be pushed around. What? And we won't be pushed around. I can't hear you. And we won't be pushed around. One more time. And we won't be pushed around.
Well, that's really quite moving, isn't it? I mean, let's understand and let's acknowledge that we are only the custodians of this planet. We have a responsibility to protect the resources for future generations. Yet, we have a socio-psychopathic global corporatist agenda unfolding at a phenomenal rate of knots. So, I'm sure that Mark Durkan, the Northern Ireland Environment Minister, was under enormous pressure from Tamron and from their lobbyists to dismiss the objections of the local community. So full credit to Mark Durkan, and I hope that the people of Northern Ireland are able to prevent this abomination from being unleashed upon their province or beneath their province. So we're going to take a short break, but let's have a look at this animation during the break very carefully. I've played this over a number of weeks because it is very, very significant. It's an animation produced by David Monk, the son of Brian Monk, whom many of you will have seen on episodes 2 and 18 of Fracking Nightmare. David Monk put this animation together following suggestions that the number of wells that had been drilled in southern Queensland was being grossly exaggerated by activists. Some 6,000 wells have been drilled in southern Queensland over the past decade, and about half of them have been drilled in the last 3.5 years. So this animation, where are the gas wells? This is an area of southern Queensland that is approximately the size of the UK. Obviously, the population density of southern Queensland is a fraction of the population density of the UK. And in fact, that was a factor in how the gas companies were able to drill so extensively in such a short space of time. We have an opportunity to prevent this in this country. If we don't, then unfortunately the prognosis is perhaps not dissimilar to that of southern Queensland. I'll see you in part 3.
So where are the gas wells? Number 1, Tara Township. Here's the town of Tara. Let's zoom out and find a common radius measurement. So we're looking at about 18 kilometres, so that'd put 6 gas wells within 18 kilometres. So number 2, Chinchilla Township. So here's the township of Chinchilla. We zoom out, we get our 18 kilometres again, which gives us about 10 gas wells within the 18 kilometre radius. Now number 3, Dalby Township. Okay, so the Dalby Township, let's zoom out, get to our measurement tool, and Fort Dalby, we end up with one gas well within a 19-kilometre radius. Number 4, the unlucky ones in the gas fields. This is QGC BG Group's Kenya Gas Fields processing plant on the edge of several residential estates and farms. The evaporation ponds alone cover almost 5.5 kilometres. So let's put it in perspective. Let's zoom out from the town of Chinchilla and make a comparison. The entire width from town end to end is 3.21 kilometres. The length is about 3.29 kilometres. The evaporation ponds would cover Chinchilla 1.5 times. Let's zoom out from one of QGC's gas fields. Yes, the dots are gas wells. Yes, the industry isn't even exporting yet. Go to our measurement tool and we have around a 22-kilometre radius. Now I'll give you an example of just how safe human beings will be throughout Australia with the unconventional gas industry. QGC's Kate Well cluster is in the heart of a residential estate. So Toowoomba, unconventional gas has its eyes seriously fixed on you and your surrounds. So no gas wells within a 32-kilometre radius, but if we go for a flight out to your west, you'll see the multinational giants aren't too far away. We pass Mount Irving, Mount Moriah, West Prairie, Cecil Plains, Grassdale, Cumberilla. Are you enjoying the flight? Bilby, Kogan, Weambilla. I can't see why people are whinging. This should be in everyone's backyard, shouldn't it? Here's QGC's tenements, Origin Energy's tenements. Oh, hang on, they're actually multinational corporations. Do you want this where you live? And ending with Miles. And how about a flyover from Cecil Plains to central Queensland? This is beautiful farming country. Unfortunately, those that are fixated on containment of the unconventional gas global giants are delusional. Prime agricultural land represents easier, more accessible drilling. It is not protected, as the government has indicated it does not have the right to take a landholder's right to negotiate with a gas company away from them, even if they are on prime agricultural land. Zooming out and moving further north now, you can see we've really been asleep at the wheel. Zooming in, the blurred clusters turn into definable spots, each one potentially causing irreversible damage to the country. I just cannot stress enough that a majority of the unconventional gas wells are not yet in production. The true effects will become undeniable upon export. What's the scale of damage over Queensland so far? The gas industry is only in first gear in one state, covering over 1,000 kilometres long, over 300 kilometres wide. Some very credible projections put total potential unconventional gas well numbers in excess of 200,000 for Queensland alone. It is not the intent of this video to encourage a defeatist thought process. On the contrary, unconventional gas has been heavily wounded in the eyes of the public. Our window of opportunity still exists. Think national, not in my backyard. Stop the first export train, the Surat Basin to Gladstone's Curtis Island, and stop the unconventional gas industry in this country.
Well, it's pretty scary stuff, huh? And hopefully it gets your attention, because if that was the UK, then within a generation, large tracts of this country would be completely uninhabitable. In Australia, one could argue that the people could move somewhere else. They could move to the coastline. But what it's doing is it's destroying the agricultural heartland of southern Queensland. Do the global corporatists care? Of course not. It's just collateral damage. And as Brian Monk has shared on this programme before, the politicians of Queensland and elsewhere in Australia are even more corrupt than the politicians that we have in this country. And of course we all know now how they are controlled in this country. But that isn't what this programme is about, so we'll leave that for another show. Meanwhile, in this country, we are making enormous progress in raising the awareness. And we are helped by the fact that the industry in this country really can only be described as a bunch of cowboys. They really don't know what they're doing. I mean, this is well established. Just look at the evidence. Up until recently, of course, the only well that had been drilled and fracked was at Priest Hall and the Fylde Peninsula. The well that was damaged, yet they still kept fracking, and that resulted in the 2 seismic events of 2011. Well, the first well to be fracked since the moratorium was lifted is at West Newton, about 14 miles to the east of Crawberry Hill in East Yorkshire, and about 10 miles north of Hull. It's in a remote area. There are only small hamlets there, not even villages, just hamlets. But it's about 4 or 5 miles from the coast. But this area is going to be devastated if we don't get this shut down. However, this week, Rathlin looked as though, at the start of the week, that they were about to start moving equipment out. And so on Thursday, I was anticipating going over to West Newton to see the rig come out. And in fact, I'd been at a meeting in one of the communities around Beverley the night before, and had suggested to that community that maybe, you know, the following day they needed to be on the lookout, because there was the possibility that the rig might be moved out of West Newton and tripped 12 miles up the road or so to Crawberry Hill, and that, you know, we should probably have a reception committee of some sort for it. Well, I got a call at 7:30 in the morning from somebody en route to West Newton who explained to me that there was a whole bunch of trucks in a lay-by with what looked like oil field equipment that was most likely on its way to West Newton. Now, this was very unexpected, so I jumped in the car, drove straight over to this particular lay-by where the trucks were hooked up. I got there just as the trucks were pulling out. So I managed to get into the middle of the convoy, and as I pulled out the lay-by, it absolutely spooked the police officer who was directing the traffic. So he legged it to the front of the convoy, got back in his police vehicle, and the police vehicle went up to the roundabout, and I saw the police jump out there to hold the traffic up, and then as the trucks came round, it looked like they were planning on flagging me over. So I decided that maybe I'd better go the back route to West Newton, which I duly did. Unfortunately, it's a much longer route, so I didn't get there until after the convoy had got into the site there. And as I was watching what was going on and also logging the equipment, it appeared that Rathlin had experienced a problem. So far from the rig coming out of West Newton, it was now absolutely blocked in by all this equipment that had arrived, and it was well intervention equipment. So I contacted one of the members of the local group, and he contacted the health and safety executive, who readily acknowledged that Rathlin had informed them 2 days previously that they had experienced some unexpected pressure in the well. Well, that explained why this piece of equipment was being brought to the site, because I recognise this as part of the coiled tubing crane. This is a continuous tube that's lowered into the well. It can handle a multitude of tasks, but it's indicative of the fact that there was indeed some unexpected activity down the well. Now, what is very interesting is that Rathlin have belatedly issued a very terse statement, but the Environment Agency, when they were contacted on Thursday, were extremely upset that they hadn't heard anything from Rathlin at all. So whether or not the rig was scheduled to move on Thursday, we'll never know. But it doesn't look like it's going to be moving anytime soon, because it looks like Rathlin have got their hands full at West Newton. So here we go again. You know, this well has been subjected to what Rathlin euphemistically call a mini frack. The objective being to establish at what pressure the rocks fracture. So in other words, they did, of course, frack, as we well know, because of all the various components and the chemicals and the silica that they brought onto the site there. Well, The police were obviously a little bit nervous with all this equipment around because this is the police helicopter flying over. The site was absolutely chock-a-block. And later on in the afternoon, although some of the flatbeds left, obviously the rig was still very much still in situ. So, Crawberry Hill is still a camp in waiting. But it didn't have to wait too long for some action, because over this past weekend there has been the Reclaim the Power camp, which there are mixed views on Reclaim the Power, but let's look at what occurred today, the day of action. Because one of the things that we're up against in this country is the regionalisation of news. So although Borkum made it into the national press because it was in Sussex and because the press could take an easy trip down just 30 miles south of London and film the action there, Barton Moss, very few people outside of the northwest have really heard or are aware of what occurred at Barton Moss last winter. This is the compartmentalising of the news. Certainly, very few people in East Yorkshire have heard of Barton Moss. And likewise, very few people outside of East Yorkshire are aware of what's going on at Crawberry Hill and West Newton. Well, today was the day of action. And the few hundred people, I have no idea what numbers are there, but the few hundred people that were camping in a field on the Fylde Peninsula at just outside Blackpool today decided to show as widely as possible that the British public is not going to be a rollover. We are not just going to simply allow the frack trucks to roll into town. So one of the elements of today was the occupation of Quadrilla's headquarters in the northwest. I'm not sure what the building is in the background because I'm sure the protectors didn't demolish Quadrilla's headquarters. This apparently is Quadrilla's PR representative trying to put a positive spin on what was occurring. This was outside the headquarters. The representation there, of course, is of the euphemism, as we all know Quadrilla as Quadzilla. Well, it wasn't restricted to the northwest because down at Swansea, where the Swansea University has a department that is supportive of the fracking industry, the unconventional gas industry. This is very much a part of the relationship of Gerwyn Llewellyn-Williams, who's Bridgend based, and of course he's the owner of UK Methane and Coastal Oil and Gas. UK Methane owning a number of pedals right across the old South Wales coalfields. Then at Crawberry Hill, a number of people came there and they locked on at the gates. Now there is some excellent Bambuser footage, so if you want to see how this lock-on was initiated, simply search for Crawberry Hill on Bambuser and you will see the thuggish behaviour of the security personnel on site there. This is Beacon Security, a Burgess Hill-based company bought in by Rathlin, by Montague Smith, the Chief Executive Officer of the company, after the local Hull group, security group, 24/7, had effectively allowed the protectors to build the castle. Well, reportedly, Beacon Security have been instructed to get rid of the protectors, whatever it takes. Well, today the security guards demonstrated that they're itching for a scrap. Fortunately, they didn't get it. The protectors didn't rise to the bait. And when the police came along, for the first time, Humberside Police actually demonstrated that they might be reading up on the Crown Prosecution Service guidelines for behaving at peaceful protest. So they simply came and observed. Of course, it might have had something to do with the fact that the trucks weren't expected to roll into Crawberry Hill today. But nonetheless, the police simply observed, and after a few hours, the protectors went on their way. Point made. The reality is Montague Smith and Rathlin Energy and Beacon Security the level of creativity that can be brought to bear hasn't even begun yet. This is just a taster. So better get the checkbook out, because in addition to spending some, what, 25,000 plus a day on the well intervention equipment at West Newton, you probably need to think about your security budget. So anyway, it doesn't matter how much you spend, we will still bring an enormous amount of creativity to bear. Well, it wasn't just the Fylde Peninsula or Swansea University or Crawberry Hill. Reclaim the Power today also dropped a banner. If we look on the slide here on screen, and the top left there, they dropped a banner across the Salford Quays and on the Manchester Ship Canal. They occupied the iGas headquarters in London, and also the DEFRA headquarters in London. And of course, the occupation of DEFRA is a direct response to DEFRA releasing a report that they had commissioned on the potential impact of the fracking industry on communities and local infrastructure around the country. And when the report was released, there were no fewer than 63 redactions in that report. The redaction, it means that it was blacked out. And DEFRA, despite being asked to release the full contents of this report, have stated that they have no intention of doing so. Well, this speaks absolutely volumes, because basically what we have here is a situation where a British government department is deliberately censoring a report because it contains information which may be detrimental to their agenda. What we do know is that the parts of the report that have been redacted refer to the impact on property prices, which, as we know, go down wherever this industry rolls into town. It talks about the impact of traffic movements in the community, and this was actually one of the reasons given by West Sussex County Council for refusing Celtique the licence planning application in Whisper Green. So we need to see that full report. The British public does not take this lightly. Fiduciary responsibility is the nature of political longevity. In other words, a politician needs to understand that their primary responsibility is to the people whom they represent. Whether they voted for them or not, they still have a responsibility to represent that community. And every politician in this country should be putting pressure on DEFRA to release the full unredacted report, so that the British people can see that the British government have been advised that this is an industry that has no place in this densely populated country of ours. I believe that we are on a cusp of change here. The tide is swinging against an unconventional gas industry that will unleash horrendous contamination upon this country, resulting in the loss of agricultural livelihoods and phenomenal negative health impacts. Get out, visit the camps that are being established around the country, and join the anti-fracking movement. We will win this. Thanks for joining me. See you next week.